We're going to be talking about JFK's New Frontier and LBJ's Great Society, how they continued the ideas of the New Deal. So first we start off with Kennedy's plan that was known as the New Frontier, and he put a lot of money into the space program because of the space race with the Soviets, and the Soviets were concerned that they had outspaced us, if I can say that, outscienced us in the field of space. So Kennedy put a lot of money into science education and said, we're going to put a man on the moon. And in fact, we did accomplish that in July of 1969. And that was quite expensive, but it was a national goal. We all looked forward to it. It was something that kind of unified the nation. He also developed a program called the Peace Corps, where American volunteers went abroad to developing nations to help train local people in education and set up health programs. And this was designed to improve the standard of living in other countries so they would be less attracted to communism. Because remember, if people's living conditions are terrible and the government comes along to promise them that the government will give them everything they need, as communism does promise, that will be attractive to somebody who has nothing. But this program is still in existence and it builds goodwill for the United States. Okay, after Kennedy was assassinated, and I put some pictures here about that. This was the parade right before in Dallas in November of 1963. And this was after the shots were fired. We see Jackie Kennedy kind of panicking and trying to climb out of the car. And then immediately after he was pronounced dead, this is Johnson, and he was being sworn in on the airplane of Air Force One, and Mrs. Kennedy is standing right next to him to kind of show continuation in leadership. And then, of course, this is the tragic picture of the funeral, where you see the children at the funeral and young John F. Kennedy Jr. saluting his father, and the brothers of Kennedy. This is Bobby Kennedy, and he was a lawyer who worked for the government and was really instrumental in civil rights, and he was killed in 1968. And then this is Ted Kennedy, who was the senator from Massachusetts for many, many years. Okay, so going back to what happened next in our story, Johnson took over, and he was really in a mixed bag. If we look at Johnson's foreign policy in terms of Vietnam, he was the one who was responsible for the Tonkin Gulf incident and resolution, and the increase in American involvement in Vietnam and refusal to back down in the face of obvious information that we were not going to win. But when it comes to civil rights laws and helping the poor, Johnson was really on board with that. So he created a lot of programs to do that. So we have the VISTA program, which was like a domestic Peace Corps. He created the Office of Economic Opportunity, which is known as the War on Poverty. So please make sure you know that. It's referred to, the official name for his programs of the Great Society, but everybody talks about it as called the War on Poverty. So he created something called Project Head Start, which is education for preschoolers. That's still around today. A law was passed called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was giving federal money to school districts as long as they would be integrated. So he's trying to help to end segregation. He created Medicare, which was health insurance for the elderly, and Medicaid, which is a program to help to provide medical insurance for the needy. Okay, so these programs are also still around today. He created something called the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which I think was cut off on your handout. It's a new cabinet level meant to oversee federal efforts to improve housing and economic development of the cities. For those of you who listened to my last video, we talked about something called white flight. When the white people left, you had minorities and poorer people left in the cities and less of a tax base to develop the cities. And this was an acknowledgement that that had happened and saying we're going to try to do something about it. And that's still around today. And we have food stamps, which is still around today. So this is a federal agency that gives food to people who are poor. They give them tickets. They can use them at the supermarket. It's called SNAP now, but many people still receive that. Okay, going on to our questions. I had given you definitions of what it means to be a conservative and what it means to be a liberal. We talked about that in the beginning of the year when we discussed the idea about Republicans and Democrats. Remember, like the third day of school, I gave you that quiz to see where you stood, and the Republicans were more conservative and the liberals were more Democrat. Okay, so how would a liberal view JFK's new frontier? Well, they would like most of his programs because the government's trying to support the poor and playing an active role abroad. Conservatives, we'd have a split here. They would like the part of his programs that portray the United States as a strong nation and being tough against the Soviets and communism, but they would not especially like the idea about the government helping the poor because the conservatives believe in laissez-faire. Okay, we had talked about these pictures. Going on to how a liberal would feel about the Great Society. They would like it. They would feel that if these programs help all Americans attain a better life, a conservative would be totally against the Great Society. And as a matter of fact, since the Great Society came into effect with Medicare and Medicaid and food stamps and Head Start, we see a big push by conservatives to try to undo those things. And so this is why there was such an attack on the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as people call it, because Obamacare built on Medicare and Medicaid to try to give health insurance to people. Instead of having a national plan, this is what Obama could get through Congress, a plan where people would have to buy it themselves, but get some kind of a tax credit for doing so, or help if they couldn't afford it. And so, the conservatives don't like that idea of the government kind of taking on this role of helping people because people should just work for their own success. Okay, question 3. How are these policies a continuation of FDR's New Deal? Well, FDR created many different programs to try to fix the problem of unemployment and stimulate the economy during the Great Depression. He provided a safety net for the poor and put more regulations in place to try to create a more even playing field. And so these programs created by Johnson's Great Society or War on Poverty continue in that same line of reasoning, saying we're going to provide a safety net, we're going to try to create a more even playing field. Okay, and so this was an opinion question, so I'm going to leave you with that one. And just going over the answers, the successful launching of Sputnik by the Soviet Union in 1957 signaled the beginning of American fears that Soviets had achieved technological superiority. And the famous line from Kennedy when he's encouraging American people to develop a personal commitment to work for national ideals. Don't expect handouts, you should work and contribute to the community. It's like sitting in class and not saying anything. We're not going to have a good conversation if everybody just expects somebody else to talk. And this last question, similarities between FDR and LBJ, is that both expanded the role of government in citizens' lives. Okay, so this goes back to our aim now, which is how did the New Frontier and LBJ's Great Society continue the ideas of the New Deal? Will we see a greater involvement of the government in people's lives, an increase in trying to promote a safety net? And then the Great Society went even further and tried to fight against segregation and discrimination. Okay, have a great day, everybody.